You're making the same mistake that Frank Morales did. Dr. Duardo, this question is for you. So, thank you so much. I think maybe I just speak for myself, but I hope I speak for the entire board when I say that we welcome LACO with open arms in this partnership. One question that I have is, as far as those high-level issues that were pointed out in the audit, I understand that the district attorney is going to get those referrals, and I appreciate that they do so. But how about district personnel staff so that they can also take action? Because that often takes a lot less time. Is that also happening so that we hold whoever's accountable at the quickest pace possible?
So I would imagine when the DA looks at the information and gets the entire report, they will determine what other steps they need to take.
Right, but a criminal threshold is sometimes higher than a civil threshold, and so we may be able to address some of the things on a human resources level to make sure that these predators are no longer within district office prior to the district attorney taking charge, because that's a higher threshold, right, for a criminal conviction. Are you giving that information to Dr. Martinez so that he can take action?
Hold on, Dr. Clark will respond to that.
The answer is yes. We've already shared the FICMAT report with Dr. Martinez. Also, we had a meeting today with Dr. Martinez, the HR staff, and the payroll staff, and shared the FICMAT report with them. So we've started the process of looking specifically at the adult education report. It's important to note that while the report focuses on adult education, a lot of those issues appear to be systemic. So when you look at HR and you look at some of the things that are noted, it's not, even though the FICMAT report focused on adult education, they filter over into other areas. So we shared that report with the payroll and HR staff. We started working on an action plan to specifically address some of those issues. Dr. Kuna is the chief HR representative for LACO. He was also involved in that meeting. Over the course of the next few weeks, we'll be working directly with Dr. Martinez and the HR and other business services staff to make sure that whatever systems we put in place, they're solid, they're succinct, and they're sustainable. One of the things that we've noted is while progress is being made, completing things from inception to completion in terms of internal control is where we need to get the district. And so those are the things that we'll continue to focus on.
Thank you, Dr. Clark, and that answered a portion of my question, but I'm asking specific to individuals who may have acted inappropriately in the past or current day and holding them accountable. So not the systemic, but these individual actors within the school district. Is that information making its way over to district staff?
Yes, it will be.
It will be, but not yet.
Some of it has been. However, in talking with Mr. Fine with FICMAT, we have the option of bringing the FICMAT team in to sit down with Dr. Martinez and go through a lot of the details, because if you notice in the report, names were not put there. That's just a common practice for the report. However, as we go through this process of analyzing what's actually happening, we can definitely sit down and have a conversation with FICMAT about the particulars of who those individuals actually are as identified in the report. Just keep in mind, this is the first week after the report has been released that LACO has been able to come in and work with Dr. Martinez and his team. So it's the start of the process, it's not the end.
Thank you so much. And as we deliberate on adjustments with personnel, does LACO have the authority to hire and fire any of the district personnel?
LACO has the ability to work directly with the superintendent, where we will be able to make recommendations to him, and he will ultimately make those recommendations to the board.
Got it. So those are recommendations. And as those recommendations come about, because I, believe it or not, I embrace them wholeheartedly, but one of the conflicts or issues that I'm seeing as a governing board member is the lack of accountability in terms of where the recommendation is coming from, whether it's coming from internal staff or LACO. And so I would only ask that if LACO is acting in the best intentions, which I'm certain that it is, that some of those recommendations make their way to the board in writing and publicly. I've noticed recently a lot of meetings taking place with certain board members, and not others. Never myself, for instance, and I don't know who's interacting with LACO and who isn't. And I understand that there's the the Brown Act, and so this is maybe why we have conversations during closed session or open session the way that we're having now. But I feel very kept in the dark with LACO's recommendations, and I see other board members getting that information. And I know that it's not your intention to provoke a Brown Act violation, but how are the rest of us supposed to get that information? And how do I ensure that the recommendations coming from staff are coming from either them or LACO? Is that something that you can help us out with?
Sure. So our door is always open to any board member of this governing board or any other board to discuss or address any issues. And we very much so take notice of the Brown Act. We try to make sure we have no more than 2 board members together. One of the things that we will be doing in working with Dr. Martinez is working to schedule a board study session with you, all of you, so that we can flush these things out and talk about some of the issues that we're seeing, where we can talk about the action steps that we believe are necessary and give you the ability to engage in dialogue. The conversations that we've had are really centered around systems. One of the things that I will note is that, in terms of engaging with us, the board president is the one that we normally go to if there are any questions in conjunction with the superintendent. And we expect that through the president of this board, they'll convey that information back. So if you ever feel like something has been
Dr. Clark,
shared,
excuse me, let me stop you right there though, but that's a Brown Act violation. She can't convey that information to the rest of us. And the board president has no more authority than any of us up here. I understand some people have more, have better relationships than others and are able to put together 3 votes easier than others. But the board president has no more authority than any of the rest of us here. That's what I'm trying to convey to you. She can't convey anything to the rest of us, otherwise it's a Brown Act violation, and that's where I'm saying things are getting lost in translation.
so I have a different perspective. Whenever the board president has a meeting and we're asking a representative from this board to be there, when the board president is here in this session, she has the ability to update this board on meetings that she has had. And so if that's a meeting with us, if that's a meeting with someone else, if that's a meeting at your, back to school night, she has the ability, or he or whoever has the ability to do that. So what I'll say to you is,
how
going
many
forward,
times have you or dual superintendent Mark Skvarna seen that happen?
I'm not at your board meeting.
But it hasn't happened. Dr. Skvarna, how many times has that happened? Let me ask you. Because it's not happening. Has it?
No.
Thank you so much for acknowledging that. And that's my concern. And if we're going to be true partners, maybe we can commit to a better system moving forward. Because I don't know how we're choosing, and it's not always the board president. For instance, isn't it true that I just, walked in on a meeting right now with you all and President Flores and Board Clerk Cupchoy? So what was this meeting about? We have no idea. Who's invited? How were they invited? Why? We have no idea. I'm just asking that you please give the same deference or willingness to partner with all the board members, because there is a breakdown in communication, and I want to make sure that we fix this district together. And I really do embrace you with open arms, but I don't understand why you're just communicating with some board members and not others.
and
That's my request.
We can absolutely do that. And just to clarify, we didn't call a meeting this afternoon. We were requested to attend a meeting, and we're happy to do that. Anytime there's a request, we will make sure that we honor the request to attend. And so if there's a request that comes through for us to attend another meeting with any other individuals, we can do that, be that through this format, through a board study session, or even if it's with 2 additional board members. And so your point is very well taken, especially if you feel that information isn't being conveyed. We'll make sure that we go back and look at our internal protocols and working with the superintendent to make sure that whatever information we're sharing that is getting to all board members.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. I do appreciate it.
Dr. Cupchoy.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank you so much for being here this evening, and also your partnership is very much welcomed. I know that the community and for quite a few years have had a lot of concerns about, particularly in adult education, but in other divisions as well as human resources. And just kind of piggybacking a little bit on Board Member Cisneros, I wanted to know what happens in the case of individuals that are no longer working in the district, but were part of, I guess we could say, the fraud, the abuse, etc., that have been encountered that are going to be relayed to the district attorney's office.
So that's a part of the investigation that the district attorney will, make those determinations. One of the things that we are working on is looking at the payroll records, particularly STRS and PERS records, to determine if the organization has inaccurately or fraudulently reported time for STRS and PERS, and we'll be working to self-disclose any issues that might arise. And that'll definitely be something that we expect to come back to the board as we work with the team to identify any potential issues in that area. The FICMAT report noted it, but for us it's really getting in and doing a deep dive to, again, identify the particular individuals, if any, that are associated with that.
And then my last question is just if you could share a little bit for purposes of the public so we can understand fully. My understanding is that this particular audit report that we received, this is just one part of, we're expecting a second part that will be coming soon. What's the time frame on that, and if you could share anything about the scope?
Okay, so the FICMAT report in association with the Adult Education Program is complete. There's nothing else coming from FICMAT regarding that. If from this point, based from Dr. Duardo being here, we're turning it over to the DA's office. The district itself has 15 calendar days to respond to the county superintendent in terms of corrective action steps. There is a second report that FICMAT is working on. It's related to the facilities program. That report we're expecting in about 60 days. At that point, you can expect Dr. Duardo to be back here with me and her team to present that report to the board as well. And the same thing would happen after that. Depending on the findings, if there are recommendations, you can work to address the recommendations. If there's a directive to report it to the DA's office, we would follow that as well. Thank you. Mr. President.
So first of all, thank you. I think this report, aside from being very alarming, I think it's been a long time coming. I think this certainly validates the concerns that the employees, I think brought at any given point to all these board members. But certainly, when I was president, when I called for a forensic audit, and I want to thank the assembly member for being here because, after this board calling for the audit, she offered help bringing the state audit, and I think some of the recommendations are working their way. I certainly welcome more manpower, for the lack of a better word. I think it's obviously this cabinet has been working diligently to try to implement some of the findings and recommendations from the state audit. Obviously, this is a lot more alarming and serious, and I also do have some concerns about just being a very small test sample. I mean, 24 people, 4,000 transactions, $11 million. That's very concerning to me, and I highly suspect that this is just a control sample. If this is a systemic issue, then obviously there's a lot more work on our part to ensure that we take immediate action in terms of what we can do now internally. And I hope that as you send these recommendations to all these agencies, that is not, we intend, I'm assuming with the support of my colleagues, we will obviously follow the recommendation to do the same, but I hope that everyone comes together to make sure that those agencies actually take it seriously and give it the proper priority if they understand the dire situation that we're in, because oftentimes you just send a report, you send a letter, and we don't know exactly how quickly these agencies may act. And to echo Mr. Gianello's point, to the extent that we can get those individual names and the support from LACO to our superintendent so we can act swiftly, I think the better. I mean, this particular system that was designed by certain individuals to siphon money away from our students is completely unacceptable.
Really?
And as a board member,
as
a board member,
let's talk about it.
I understand
Let's talk
that
about it.
we all collectively, have to, take accountability and responsibility for this. And I think it's important to recognize that it was this board who was very courageous and actually welcoming and calling for that forensic audit.
Really?
I know that.
Really courageous.
I know people are passionate about the issue, but I think
You're stealing.
I want to welcome you.
Can we please be respectful of our colleagues, please? Thank you.
And as that you help us, you help this team to act quickly with whatever power we have as we wait for the other agencies to take action.
You absolutely have our commitment. We didn't just send a copy of the report. There's been multiple telephone calls and conversations back and forth, and we will be tracking and monitoring and making sure we're working together to make this happen.
Mr. Chacon.
I know you've been thanked already, and I just also want to thank you. I totally welcomed you from the first day. I continue to welcome you and support all your recommendations. I do want to say that Dr. Mark Skvarna certainly has played a positive role in helping us submit a positive budget to the county. And the only question I have is, just for clarification purposes, I know that we've been told that he can veto the board's action when it comes to having a fiscal impact on the financial side of the budget. Is there any way he can veto an action when it's just something that doesn't look right on the agenda and just say, I don't recommend the board take action? Or is that beyond his scope of duties?
He's primarily here to look at the fiscal protection of public funds and the district funding to make sure that you do not go insolvent. But if there are things that we think are connected to and may lead to that, we may take a closer role in that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Brennan.
Two follow-up question. Actually, I read the report and it was pretty voluminous, but I didn't see anywhere in the report, and perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong and point me to the right page, in terms of documenting also the intentional over-reporting of the ADA of adult education. I know this board took action to return funds to the consortium, and I'm not sure if it's documented in this report, and if so, I want to thank you for it, and if it didn't, you know, how do we reconcile that also as part of, you know, this comprehensive report?
Okay. We'll have Mr. Fine respond to that.
Good evening, trustees. Superintendent Martinez, Michael Fine, Chief Executive Officer of the state's Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team. The ADA issue is in somewhat mute at this point because the state doesn't fund adult ed on the basis of average daily attendance any longer. Since the local control funding formula came in place in 13, 14 was its first fiscal year, the rules changed, and so within the period of time that we looked at the scope of the work, ADA is not the determining factor any longer, and so it doesn't necessarily do you any good or any harm. Certainly, it's bad practice not to be accurately tracking that. You want to know if you've got attendance in the classes. It doesn't make any sense to pay somebody to teach a class where there's one person in it, two people in it. So your old rules, and one of your speakers addressed that earlier this evening, well, your old rules were there was a minimum number of enrollment. Well, that made sense when you were funded on that enrollment basis, that you needed to have revenue sufficient to cover your costs, right? That's not necessarily the basis of the funding any longer. And so the impact is different.
Dr.
If
Fine,
the scope
I'm sorry
was to go back.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I mean, and absolutely, I mean, low class sizes is definitely something we want to strive for, but I think trustworthiness also counts for something. So, I mean, do you have any thoughts, you know, because I see a lot of yappity yaps over there, you know, who are not letting you speak about lying about the enrollment numbers? I mean, what's the point of that then?
Wow.
So first, I don't think anybody's prevented us from speaking.
Well, I hear the comments, and I find it tough for you to speak.
Oh, okay.
To hear you speak, because I'm hearing the comments.
And I
when it should be you
appreciate
talking.
that. That is my point. Best practice would say you track that and you keep track of it. The issue of reporting it to generate funds being inappropriate was not within the time period that we looked at. That was the system that was in place prior. So if the scope had gone back, and you've already addressed that, the state has recouped some of those funds from prior periods of time, right, in your history. But currently, and it's Mr. Thank you for the degree, but I haven't earned that.
Okay, well, Mr.
That's
Fine.
very special.
Fine. Thanks for being here. You know, I just gave you an unintentional promotion. You've been officially demoted. But I think to the extent, and this is the point I'm trying to make, to the extent that certain individuals intentionally design a system to benefit themselves, and to the extent that I empty a report what had only a test, sample, but if there is also intentional act of misreporting for the simple benefit of receiving additional funds to continue the system that they had designed, I do find it pretty alarming that it wasn't documented, and somehow I think it needs to be looked at, because I understand that it no longer applies. However, that was the system that was designed under the previous years, and I think it's important to look whether there was intentional commitment to defraud the state for the benefit of the system they had designed.
Certainly that's possible in the prior years. In the period that we looked at, the system changed, right? The state system changed. Your characterization of the local system and elements that were designed, control elements that were removed that should have been there, best practices not being followed, certainly that's all addressed in the report from an overarching standpoint. We would always say, and our report says this, every report we write says this because this is absolutely critical, tone at the top is so important. And while we look to you at being at the top and the tone you set and the expectations of the standards you set, when we look at an individual department, it's equally important. Whoever is running that department, the tone they set, the practice, do they insist on best practice? Ultimately, the employees take leadership, whether it's good or bad. They take leadership and they ultimately follow that leadership, right? And so in the case of a department whose leaders, as you said, designed a system that didn't follow best practices, didn't follow the intent of, I think, what everybody would of expectations. Are there other areas that potentially are suspect? Certainly, you could draw some of those conclusions, but our review was based on a given scope that we entered into and discussed at length. I think you're well aware that to the county superintendent's credit, this request actually came a long time ago. And we actually deferred to the Joint Legislative Audit Committee and their decision with the members' input to the state audit. We assisted the state audit where agencies that cooperate with each other on a regular basis. The feeling was the state audit didn't get into adult ed deep enough, and so the request was renewed, and that's when we stepped up and to deal with that.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Fine, before you step away, given that, and you said that the state was not defrauded, would it be reasonable for someone to conclude that perhaps the district was defrauded by the simple fact that some individuals were over-reporting numbers in adult education, which thereby resulted in potential raises, merit increases, additional resources spent in staffing up an area where there were classes with 0 or very few students?
So I will leave the determination of whether you were defrauded or not to the district attorney and to the courts. That's ultimately their purview, not mine. Our report points out that teachers were assigned to classes that had no students, time wasn't properly accounted for, assignments tend to favor certain people, those kinds of things. I don't know that most folks would assign fraud to that activity. Is that a violation of any number of standards that we would consider to be acceptable? Is it a violation of law? That's what the district attorney will look at. And we will, as we do in all these reports, however many years it takes the district attorney to work through this, we will be at their side supporting them with the detail and with the subject matter expertise that they will need.
I'll take that as a yes.
Mr. Chuckle.
I know that you mentioned a 15-day period, if I understand correctly, and I just want to ask it so that I'm real clear, where the district, assuming through the leadership of the superintendent, superintendent, we have 15 days to kind of show an action plan. So can you actually give me the date, the actual date of when that is?
It'll be 15 calendar days starting tomorrow.
Thank you.
So I think in closing, I just want to thank LACO for being here today, Dr. Duardo, Dr. Clark, Mr. Skvarna. I know we've worked very closely in the past, especially since Mr. Skvarna has been on board with us. And, we are going through a very tough time, but I think that collaboratively, we're going to be in a better space. And I'm looking forward to the 15 days and even the 60 days, because I think that there is a commitment from this board and, the constituency, cabinet, our superintendent, to really turn the page on this district. So thank you for all your efforts. Thank you for being here tonight. And just understand it's a very emotional time for a lot of us. So, just be patient, and, I'm sure that, again, collectively, we'll be in a much better space.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
We're here to help.